Hello and welcome to Kiki's Chat Show. Today, again, here we are. I have a wonderful guest today. I attended, I think it was a symposium or something online. And I didn't know what I was going to meet. I'd never heard of this gentleman before. And I was so awed by him. I was so taken by him that I thought, well, listeners, I'm going to share him with you. We are all going to meet him. We're going to listen to him. I want you also to be as enthralled as I was. Welcome to the show, Mr. Walker.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me onto your program.
It's a pleasure. Mr. Walker is really Robin Walker. The Black History Man is what he's called. He was born in London, but also lived in Jamaica for a while. He's an entrepreneur, a publisher, an educator, and an author. Now, the Black History Man, as people call him, has written so many books. And so we're going to talk all about his books, what he's seen, what he wants to share, the reason why he wrote the book, and how it will benefit us, basically. Isn't that so? Do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, what I do is I teach, I research, I work in the area of Black history and African studies. My job is to spread knowledge about that history and heritage to enable our people to build pride in their history and heritage, knowing that that pride is built on solid intellectual foundations that can be verified.
Yes. It's the verification of it, because when I joined your symposium, or I'm not sure what it's called. I keep wondering the event where you were speaking at.
We called it What's New in Black History. What's New?
What's New? When I joined What's New in Black History, one of the things that fascinated me was the way that you calmly showed us pictures in the 13th century, did you say?
In some cases, yes. And in some cases before that.
Maps, pictures, ruins, all of the things which showed that, we had great dynasties. Africa was great, and everything, we were thriving in a very positive way. Now, my first question to you, though, is what made you want to create the project about, the history of Africa? What made you decide to do this?
What initially happened in the year 1990, I came across a book by an African-American historian called Chancellor James Williams. The book was called The Destruction of Black Civilization. After reading that book, I came across another scholar, an Ethiopian scholar called Yusuf Ben Yochanan. I came across a Ghanaian scholar called J.C. de Graaf Johnson. I came across a Senegalese scholar called Cheikh Anta Diop. And I realized that all of their works had great strengths, but someone needed to put it together and make it accessible. And as the African-American scholars who were leading in Black history at that particular time, they were running out of intellectual steam. I thought, well, maybe I need to do it. There's a major story here that perhaps I need to tell. So I began researching earnestly 91, 92. And by the time I got to 1999, I'd written my first book. And then after that, I've been writing book after book, documenting my findings and putting it together.
So how many books have you written so far?
I'm not sure. I think 19.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm
So,
struggling with one book. I
mhm,
haven't got anywhere. I'm in chapter 3.
okay. So the idea then is books that cover different aspects of Black history and African heritage. So some of them are on Black history and African heritage in the history of science and technology. One of them is on mathematics. Two of them is on religion. One book which is straight history, when we ruled. One book which was on the Songhai Empire of West Africa. I've written books on Black British history, so different topic areas that I've bitten off. Some are for adults, some are for beginners, some are for children.
You know the book When We Ruled?
That's right.
What when we ruled where? In Africa or outside of Africa or what?
The title, When We Ruled, was originally going to be When We Were Kings. And then what happened was my publisher at the time, Dr. Patrick Vernon, suggested that we come with a gender neutral name rather than When We Were Kings. And so
Oh,
we both came up with When We Ruled. And the question obviously is when we ruled where?
yeah.
And the idea is just leave that hanging so people have a reason to open the book and find out where we ruled. Um, the book covers ancient history, medieval history of Black people in North Africa, West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, and Southern Africa. It covers Black presence in other parts of the world, and it takes the story up to the 20th century.
Wow. You mean we were ruling up until the 20th century, or we were in different places up until the 20th century?
In some cases, ruling, in some cases, different places. So the idea then is to focus on African civilizations. And so, for example, with West Africa, you've got the African civilizations of Ghana, medieval Mali, the Songhai Empire. In a different part of Africa, you've got the Nok, the Igbo, the Yoruba, the Benin, the Hausa, and the Kanem Bornu civilizations. In another part of Africa, you've got places like the Ashanti Empire. In other parts of Africa, if we move now to Central Africa, you've got places like Congo and Ndongo and Matamba. In East Africa, you've got places like the Swahili city-states. So these are the kinds of civilizations that are covered in the book.
I see. I'm interested to find out because I know about Songhai and I know about certain things. And I even know that Africans were trading, they were living in California, they were in America, they were all over the place. But then what happened to us? What happened? Do you know?
The first scholar to go there and to produce a comprehensive account was Professor Chancellor James Williams. His book was called The Destruction of Black Civilization. And what he does is he highlights, first of all, the role of the Arab conquest of North Africa and the damage that did to Africa. He highlights the role of mass enslavement leading to transatlantic slavery and how that did further damage to Africa. He highlights the role of colonization and the damage that did. And what he did was to lay out a template. And what my book does is fill in the gaps to explain step by step how we built civilizations, but most importantly, how we lost civilizations to how we got into the position that we're in today.
So, do you just want to give me a little bit of, just a soupçon of how we lost civilization? I'm keen to know. It's something that it bothers me a lot.
Um, a lot of people say Africa fell. Africa didn't fall. African states fell. So you have to look at it as a civilization by civilization account. Does that make sense? All
Yeah.
right. So if we're talking about where you're from, the Ghanaian region, Europeans have been slave trading in that region since the 15th century. You had, for example, the building of St. George of the Mine also known as, St. George of the Mine. The mine in Portuguese is El Mina.
Yeah.
And that becomes your first slave dungeon, El Mina Castle. Large numbers of Africans were kidnapped and ended up there. And then when you start kidnapping people from one place, you end up with people having to arm themselves to stop being kidnapped. Then you've got European gun running, where you play off A against B, B against C, C against D. So you end up with different African nations raiding each other, hoping that if they can get rid of their own enemies, they can then placate the Europeans, not realizing that if you do that, you end up stirring a problem that's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. By the time we get to 1697, we've got the birth of the Ashanti Union inland, and then that becomes a ferocious, powerful force. But they decide, well, the best way to keep our civilization alive is to sacrifice whoever we need to sacrifice. And so what then happens is you end up with African nations being played off against each other. And all that Europeans have to do is whoever the last civilization is, the last man standing, conquer that person, and you've destroyed the lot. And that's essentially how it was done bit by bit. So you had Portuguese and Spanish slave traders. You had Dutch slave traders. You had English, Danish, and so on. All these powers are essentially pulling more and more people out of Africa. Now, if you were to take it, to give an example in English, but you can then translate it into Akan languages, whatever. In English, you would have people with certain surnames: Hunter, Fisher, Baker, Mason, Tanner. These are all job titles. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
If the Masons end up on a slave ship, house building stops in that civilization. If the cooks and the bakers end up on slave ships, your cuisine disappears from that area. If your tailors end up on a slave ship, textiles disappear from your area. If your tanners end up on a slave ship, leatherware, boots, shoes disappears from that civilization. Do you see?
The farmers as well.
If the farmers disappear, you end up with a famine. So what happened is during the slave trade period, African civilizations all took the same strategy. You couldn't have your farmers out in the open, because if they are captured or killed, everybody starves. So there were all kinds. So consequently, that was the beginning of the undermining of African cuisine. Do you see?
Yeah.
And you can then replicate this same story everywhere where slave trading was going on in Africa. Then you've got the theft of the gold and resources. There's an account from 1502 of a Portuguese slave ship sailing away from the West African coast of what they called Guinea, but on a modern map it would be Ghana, sailing away with 15 tons of gold. That means that 15 tons of gold and what it would have been worth disappeared from the Ghana region. Do you see?
Yeah, I do see.
And then you add that to the destruction of art, the theft of art pieces, the destruction of the gold works, the destruction of, so same thing, if your smiths end up on a slave ship, your iron technology disappears, your gold technology disappears. So this is how you end up wiping out a civilization bit by bit by bit. And if slavery goes on for long enough, by the time we get to the story 400 years later, 500 years later, there's very little left.
So is that why Africa has, is that the whole reason why Africa has not been able to rise up again? That we were once powerful, and because we were crippled by our people being taken away, professionals, all of these people, now we are still finding it hard to rise up? Is that what it is? We're
That's
finding
part
it
of
hard.
it. Okay, let me put another side to it.
Okay.
In 2005, a black British professor, his name was Robert Beckford, commissioned some accountants and lawyers to work out how much money did black people lose by being enslaved. And in 2005, the lawyers worked out and the accountants worked out that if black people who had been through slavery were to put a case to the British government, you could argue quite logically that we are 7.5 trillion pounds poorer than we would have done had we not gone through slavery. Do you see?
Pound.
Yeah. And that's just what Britain owes its enslaved people. Presumably, you could do the same thing to France and how much it owes its enslaved people. You can then do the same thing to Portugal and Spain, how much they owe their formerly enslaved people, and so on, so on, and so forth. Okay, that's part of the story. Then you have what happened during the colonial period. I mentioned the slave ship in 1502 sailing away from the coast of Ghana with 15 tons worth of gold. How much would that be worth today at compound interest? Do you see? Then you've got the destruction of the Akan regions, the British burning down the Ashanti Royal Palace, the theft of the gold resources. As far as I know, the Ashanti gold resources are in South African museums, for real. How much of that got jacked during that time period? Do you see? So these are the kinds of questions, and when you start adding it up, it just adds up. It just ends up trillions on top of trillions on top of trillions.
I'm even speechless. This is very, very, it's very difficult to take in because all of this difficulty that we've gone through, and yet we are blamed for our poverty, and we are blamed for not catching up, and we are blamed for a lot of things. However, had they left us alone, are you saying that we would have been a major force in this on this planet?
We were a major force on this planet, and that's the point. We were a major force. So basically, if you were to go back to, say, the 12th century, 1100 and something, there was a black dynasty known as the Almoravids. There was another black dynasty called the Almohades, and these were ruling in Spain during that period. So the rulers of Spain were ruling from a city called Seville, and the monuments that Africans built in Seville are still there. There's a monument called the Alcazaba Palace. People can Google it, and that was built by these two black dynasties that ruled in Spain. During that same time period, you had the Great Zimbabwe, which is a fortified castle as the capital city of Great Zimbabwe in southern Africa. That was a great capital city and the center of major, major gold production. You had the East African civilizations along the coast of places like Tanzania, places like Kenya, places like Mozambique and Somalia. And these were very, very fine cities indeed. And the ruins of them, when I visited Kenya, I visited the ruins of some of these places. I went to sites like Jumbula Matwana, sites like Munarani, and sites like Gedi. All of these places you can Google and you can look at what's there. And what's there is very, very impressive indeed. During that same period, places like Sudan, at the time, Sudan was called Makuria. This was a place that the archaeologists have found ruins of housing complexes, and they found ruins of what would have been hot and cold water, the piping that would have created hot and cold water. But again, if we don't know these things, we don't know these things.
Yeah, but you're telling us these things. So now we know these things. We're getting to know. Yeah, I want to go backtrack a little bit to when you say that Ghana's gold is in South Africa. I don't understand that. How did Ghana's gold end up in South Africa?
I don't know the full details of who ended up taking that stuff, but I've definitely got a book which has got photographs of the Ashanti gold works. And yes, they really are in a South African museum. For real.
Have you seen it?
I've got the photographs of the stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, it's a pity that we can't show the photos of some of the ruins and things that you saw from the 13th century, etc. However, how important do you think that the pictures of, because when I saw the pictures, I was in awe. I hadn't seen them, and I know a lot about Africa. I know a lot about our history, and I know how great we were. However, I hadn't seen those pictures from the 13th century.
Yeah.
How? Yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah. One of the ways that I have revolutionized Black history and African heritage teaching is by using the imagery to the max. So other people have written books. So, for example, the legendary Professor J.C. de Graaf Johnson had written the book African Glory in 1954. The book contains 4 photographic images. It's a superb book, and it's a powerful piece of work. But what he didn't do was go further than that. So if we're going to talk about African civilizations in places like Timbuktu, in places like Jene, in places like Walata, in places like Gao, my thing is get the photographs, because these places have still got things that are standing. So, for example, if we take the West African city of Timbuktu, on a modern map, it's in Mali, and it was a city that existed during the time period of ancient Ghana, during the time period of medieval Mali, during the time period of the Songhai Empire. There's a 1326 mosque, which is still standing. It's called the Jingwedabira Mosque, and it was commissioned by Mansa Musa I. You can Google this, you can pull up a picture, and if you pull up a picture, you'll notice it looks like a castle. There's another monument there called the Oratory of Sidi Yahya. The Oratory of Sidi Yahya, some people put that 14th century, some people put it in the 15th century. That monument is still standing. Then there's a monument that was commissioned by a woman. Unfortunately, the documents don't tell us her name, but the monument commissioned by a woman, it is today called the Sankore University Mosque. We're not entirely sure when it was built, but the French colonial authorities, when they colonized Mali, they put out data claiming that it was 11th century. I have no
Wow.
reason to disagree. And if the Sankore Mosque is 11th century, that would mean that that university is older than Oxford, older than Cambridge, older than Toulouse. We could go down the list because these places are a century later.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But even there is a university standing in Morocco right now that's older than any institution in the West.
True say, true say, true say. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
True say. So for me,
So
though, but because Morocco today is no longer an all-black civilization, do you see? Whereas if we're talking about places that are still black to this day, that's the importance of places like Timbuktu.
okay, now this talking about education and all of that brings me to a question. In this country and in the West, in fact, in the whole of the West, in Germany, everywhere, Western world, a lot of black kids are disenfranchised. They are kind of, they go through the education system, but they're not really attached to it. They go, they do not study, they don't feel the need, they are miserable, they are, and they grow up, and the the trajectory is crime. They're in prison, they're all over the place. Talking about education, how is your book? Because your somehow we must marry these teachings, these books that black historians are writing. Our black children need to know about them, and they need to know the sort of human beings that they are. How do you plan to do this? How do you plan to get them into it, to make them see who they are, that the black color is very important?
I've written 3 books aimed at young people. I was commissioned by a company called Hachette. They're a branch of Franklin D. Watts Limited, to write a book for them called Black History Matters. That book won the ALCS prize in 2020. And so schools have access to that book. Black History Matters deals with ancient African history, medieval African history, mass enslavement and the resistance to it, the colonial period and the resistance to that, all the way up to the Southern African struggle, the Black American struggle, and the Black British civil rights struggle. So that's one place that people can start. Another book that me and a team of scholars, the team was me, Vanika Marshall, Paula Perry, and Anthony Vaughan. We did a book called Black British History, Black Influences on British Culture, 1948 to 2016, showing that the last 70 years of Black British history has been a powerful history, and it's laid out in a Key Stage 3 style. Key Stage 3 is the educational stage that covers 11-year-olds to 14-year-olds. And it uses the historical skills that would be expected of the national curriculum. And that book provides 1 year's worth of teaching material on Black history. And schools can use it because it meets the national curriculum exactly. That same team of writers, we did another book called 30 Black History Icons, where we've concentrated on 30 Black individuals. And how we've done that is, again, using the same skills that the national curriculum. And to give you an example of the kind of people we talk about in that book, there was a gentleman from Achim, on a modern map where Ghana is today. His name was Anton Wilhelm Amo. That wasn't his original name, but that's the name that once he got slave traded, he ended up with. So Black man captured on the coast of Ghana, ends up enslaved in Europe, and he was enslaved in the 18th century. He ended up as a professor of philosophy at one of the German universities in the 18th century. And his thesis, we were able to find it and we were able to scan it, and so people can actually see what his thesis was written in Latin. And his Latin thesis, we were able to put that in. So that's an example of how we revolutionizing education, because school children can learn about him and use all the historical skills: source analysis, textual analysis, use of imagery, heritage, representation, all of these kinds of questions that would apply in a school classroom.
Okay, now let me put a scenario to you. This is very interesting what you said. And somebody is asking, what can we do given our specialities? Your perspective on solutions is a great interest to the listener. One of the listeners is asking you that. But before you answer that, the solution question, you see, I personally think that we should try and write little cheap books, 99p, £2, but with narratives, positive narratives, truthful narratives, so that the little children start knowing this as they grow. Somebody has started making dolls, black dolls, specific black dolls for specific Black children. Now, white children can have those dolls, no problem. Have them. The whole world should have the dolls. The point is, little children will see pretty dolls, black dolls, so that they can identify, they can see themselves in the doll as they grow up. The same way, I am thinking that historians, you need to start to create these little books for the children. You see, the books that you are creating, and this is not a negative, I'm just saying, that the books you're creating are for the highly educated, the person who's reached that point where they are interested to find out. But so it is for I don't want to use the word elite because that's bastardized to the point of nonsense. But I'm looking for a word that describes people who are, scholars or something, and they need to, so you find a book in your grandfather's bookshelf. But that's not it. One of the things I have learned as I'm growing up in this country is that it starts from babyhood. They have these paper books. They even have books that children can read in the bus. It's 99p. It's £1. It's £1.20. These Ladybird books. We've all read Ladybird books. Well, I have anyway. They're a whole pack is £2. That's what we need to do. We need to start to think that teach them young and they will grow. And that's what I mean. I want to, and look, if there are people who want to do this, we've got cartoonists. We are look, at the moment, these people who do cartoons and everything, they introduce one black crime fighter in there and one, this and what. No, we have 5 black crime fighters in our African story. That's what we need. And that's what, so that by the time they get to 15, 16, 20, 35, they are now buying your high level books the way that you've written them. But we need to start from the bottom. Can you find people to do this? To commission people, or you yourselves will make some of your books to be like that?
Yeah, there's already people that have done it.
I haven't seen any black book. I never bought any for my son.
Yeah, I can tell you. So you've got people like Candace Chimbiri.
Never heard of it.
Well, you do now. So Candace Chimbiri, she's written a series of children's books. The most recent one, she's written a book on Afro hair and the history of it. You've got, she's written on Black civilizations in the ancient world. She's written on Kush. She's written on ancient Egypt. She's written on the story of the Afro comb. She's written on Windrush. So she's putting out a lot of material. So check her out. Her name is Candace Chimbiri. There's a gentleman in Birmingham called Andrew Lindo, and he's written a whole series of children's books as well, children's activities book. Check him out. In other words, in the last 5 years, the game has changed.
So, in the last 5 years?
Yes. So there's a lot of people putting out material in the last 5 years. And I'm pleased to say it's a lot of people putting out material in this country. So we changing the game.
You see, somebody's just said they love to read Greek mythology when they were kids and when they were younger, and it was all in little books, Lady Bird and all of that. Mm-hmm. That's what I want. Maybe I should start writing books, and you feed me the info, I write it, and then we'll put it together, and because something has to be done. Something has to be done. From the level of babyhood, we need to start. And I'm excited that 5 years it's been happening. So all of this happened before my children, after my children are now big men and they've missed out on all of these stories. However, it is cool. I shall not weep over it. I shall be hopeful that my grandchildren are going to come and meet these books. We need to start to educate. They don't have to be long English words to explain long English things. No long thing, as they say in Africa. All we need is that their cartoons, their drawings, their pictures, their, all sorts of things that help the imagination of children. so that they start to grow with that. We will get our doctors, nurses, whatever we need, the farmers, the painters, whatever we need, that's where we're going to get it from. This is my view.
Yeah, true say, true say.
Okay, now let's talk about something which is dear to your heart. You talked about was the Black Secret Education Project. Can you please share what it is and how it works and how we can all get involved in it?
Yeah, the Black Secret Education Project is largely a history project. And the idea is to teach Black history and African heritage. Now, I've taught courses in London, I've taught them in Birmingham, I've taught them in Manchester, I've taught them in Liverpool. But the main thing is I actually have to be there. Now, what the Black Secret Education Project does is it makes the information available online. So you can watch the classes in your own time. You could be 2 o'clock in the morning. You've got 5 minutes. You can jump on one of the classes and watch that content. If you've got an hour to spare, an hour's worth of content, you can deal with it. So the classes are filmed in a London classroom, and those classes are available everywhere. So you could be in London, you could be in Toxteth, Harlem, Kingston, Atlanta, Abuja, Nairobi, Accra. You could be in any of these places and you can access our content. Now, what the Black Secret does is to teach Black history and African heritage, beginning with medieval African history and heritage. Some of the stuff I've just been talking about today, places like the Songhai Empire, the Swahili city-states, the Great Zimbabwe, that kind of thing. Phase 2 is about to be launched, where we're going to deal with ancient African civilizations. Phase 3 is going to be global Black people over the last 500 years. And then subsequent phases will then cover Africans in the history and heritage of mathematics, science and technology, religion and spirituality, music and literature, art and architecture, and business and entrepreneurship. And the idea is we want people to subscribe to our program, and you've got access to all that content whenever you want it. So it's not like, sometimes you teach a class and everyone has to be there Thursday, 7 p.m. till 9 p.m. Now that's gone. You can access our content at any
time.
Right. And basically what the content does, it's filmed in a London classroom. You also get my PowerPoint. You also get the lecture notes. You also get the slides. And so consequently, you can go over the content as many times as you want to go over the content as you access our content. And the idea then is that you will get the most detailed African history content aimed at a general audience. And the idea is essentially the subscription is £15 per calendar month. You can subscribe for as long as you like. There's no lock-in. But because we're going to be updating more and more and more and more and more content, we would recommend people stay, because you'll get more and more and more content, and you'll get it in an interesting, a memorable, and I use lots and lots of imagery and so on, so on and so forth, so people can see the heritage. So it's not me talking about it, you will see it. So you will see the monuments, you will see the fine art, you will see the manuscripts. Yes, Africa had manuscripts. You will see the fine works in ivory, you'll see the furniture pieces, all of that. All things that people said that we didn't have. I'm going to show you what we did have.
That's very interesting. One of the questions I wanted to ask you was regarding the Black Secret Education Project. So if you paid for a course, do you then get a certificate? Is it, or how does it work? So what do you become at the end of it?
Enlightened, that's what you become at the end of it. So you will have the most detailed knowledge base on our history and heritage. And what it will do for you is it will empower you. Now, if you want to become entrepreneurial, and that option exists as well, you could become an affiliate, and you could sell our program and make money out of our program. Does that make sense? So
So
we're
the
empowering
project.
people in two ways. We're empowering them educationally, and if you
Mhm.
want to be empowered entrepreneurially, we can do that for you.
I see. Um, Coming back to a question that I asked previously, one of the listeners is asking again. She wants clarification on how do we get people back, or how do we do a rollout? I mean, you've talked about the Black Secret Education Project, but is that the only way that people will know a lot about their heritage, and therefore, if they're entrepreneurial, they will also teach it elsewhere? Or is there a solution to all of our problems by knowing what you are imparting?
Yeah, my thing is the point of scholarship isn't just to teach content, is to teach solutions. And the biggest single problem that we have as Black people is we don't see much value in each other. And the reason why we don't see value in each other is because once you suppress a people's history, how I would see value in you, how you would see value in me is through our shared history. And that history will then show the content that makes up you, the content that makes up me. So by teaching the history and heritage, then we can then build pride. And with that pride, we could want to work together. We could want to build together. And because the content will cover all the other areas, the politics, the sociology, the psychology, the business and the economics, you now have a basis on how you can move. Now, as adults, the most important thing that an adult needs to be about is getting their money right. And part of that is becoming entrepreneurial. And that entrepreneurial content will go there, because once you're entrepreneurial, you can then start to make the other political moves. But you can't make the money, excuse me, you can't make the moves without the money. And this is where the entrepreneurship thing comes in. So it's very, very important for adults to consider becoming entrepreneurial, because entrepreneurial, this is where you end up in a position where you've got more independence than if you're just a worker. I mean, no disrespect to people that are just workers, but consequently, you have more say. You can make more things happen when you're entrepreneurial.
It's difficult to be an entrepreneurial. The world is not set in that way. The world is set for everyone to be on a kind of a treadmill,
True
and
thing,
we're all
true
working
thing.
to get a salary, etc., etc. So, I mean, it depends on who wants to be entrepreneurial, and if you are teaching it, then that's a good thing. There was a question somewhere I saw. I'm trying to find the question. I can't find it, but it's it's about what you're teaching and all of the, somebody, I saw somebody saying, oh God, I have to find it. Somebody's saying we have a lot of African books from long ago, but they don't, very few though, and they're not reprinted. Is there, you know, the problem is, what is happening to us ourselves? Is it that something is holding us back from reprints and from sales? And if we start selling, do people actually buy?
I've found that people do buy. There's a lot of interest in the work that I do. And speaking to my colleagues that work in this area, I've mentioned Kandasi Chimbiri, people buy. There's other people. There's Avril Nanton that produces material. There's a gentleman called Tony Warner who has just produced a GCSE book on history where a quarter of the content is Black, and that meets the national curriculum for GCSE. So in other words, we found that there is a lot of interest in what we do. A lot of people like what we do. Now, what it means is, I mentioned a book by a Ghanaian historian, Professor John Coleman de Graaf Johnson, African Glory.
Yeah.
That was reprinted by African Americans. All right. So there's an African American company called Black Classic Press. They reprinted it. And when I came across the first time I ever bought that book, I bought the African American reprint. I've since got the 1954 original, so that takes pride of place on my library shelf.
You see, in the advent of computers and in the advent of people saving things themselves, it's easy to kind of save work. However, we have a lot of manuscripts in universities that were not preserved. And how do we, what do we do now? It's very interesting what you said about de Graaf Johnson's book, that it was revived by African Americans. How do they then add their own words to make it, because they're not there? And so how do we try and keep what we have and make like Africa, it's all coming from Africa. So how do we then keep the manuscripts, get the manuscripts, rewrite the manuscripts with all the truth in it as it was before? Is that something that's happening now?
There are people like me producing books. Other people are producing books. Again, this is the reason why I tell people to get entrepreneurial. Get entrepreneurial. There are ways of publishing books. There are ways of getting your books out there. There are vehicles that enable you to do it. Self-publishing is now a thing. And what it is because people don't know how this thing works, they assume it can't be done. And I'm saying people need to know it can be done. I'm an example of it. I've got, as I said, 19 plus books out there. It can be done. And my background isn't even history. My background's economics. So I graduated as a Bachelor of Science in Economics. I saw the importance of getting the history and heritage out there. So I do it, and other people can do it too. If it's something. So in other words, getting the content out is easier now than it has ever been at any point in history.
So you're a publisher, and if I brought my friend who is a storyteller, you would publish her book?
It depends. Here's the point. I can show what I can do is show people precisely how books can be published. And if her book doesn't contain images, and I stress the point, doesn't. If it does, that's a different story. If it doesn't contain images, I can show her how she can publish for zero. In other words, the publishing costs will be this. Does that make sense? If it's yes, if it's a book with images, the rules of the game are different. If it's text, she can publish for zero.
What if it is, comics?
The problem with that is that it's images. And when you start publishing images, it complicates the story completely. So if you've got a book where it's pure text, that's a different situation. Once you put images in, it's a different situation again.
It makes like comics and the images and all of that.
Yeah, that can be done, but the costs are not zero. In other words, I can show people how to publish for this amount, but if they want to do it with images, that's a different situation. You're going to have to do what's called a private printing. I can show people how that's done, but there will be a cost.
What is the key takeaway from your books that you want people to have in this discussion that we've just had?
Black people have a history and heritage, and it's a history and heritage to be proud of. And it's a history and heritage that's as good as any other group of people's history and heritage, just as good as what the Native Americans have, what the Europeans have, and what the people from Asia have. And the only reason why most of us don't know that history and heritage is that we weren't told, and a lot of the information was suppressed to make sure that we don't know. And when you take people's history away, they act like idiots. And that's precisely what the world has done to us, because you act in very, very counterproductive ways, because you don't know yourself, you don't know your heritage. It seriously affects your behavior. And my job is to supply that history and heritage to make Black people feel whole again, with a view to making us feel that power and develop that self-reliance, see value in each other, want to work with each other, want to build with each other.
Where can people buy your book?
Books, Amazon.
Your book.
Yeah, a lot of my stuff is on Amazon. So look me up, Robin Walker. Look me up on Amazon. But the most important thing is join the most powerful Black history and African heritage course there is, The Black Secret. Available, the Black Secret Education Project, www.theblacksecret.co.uk. Join our program, only £15 a month, and you're going to get the most powerful Black history and African heritage information there is available.
So £15 a month for how long? Forever?
If people want to stay on it forever, cool. All right. Bearing in mind, as I said, we're going to be uploading more and more hours of content so that we will eventually cover all of the areas. So it won't just be history, it'll be Black people in the history of mathematics, science and technology, religion and spirituality, and business and entrepreneurship. So if people just want the history, they want to jump on, hit the information and quit, that's cool. You can do that too. Now, if people don't act now, the price will go up as the content goes up. So, get it right now at the cheapest price. We're calling it the early bird offer.
The early bird offer. People, the early bird offer. Okay, our time has ended. We've had a very good non-pause, interesting conversation. You have to come back, because you have to come and the way that you want people to stay on the Black Secret Education Project is the same way that you may have new things that you want to tell us. But I think that people have written books, that is true, but you're a pioneer in the sense that you are educating people who didn't realize that there was something going on, and you're bringing it up to them. I think that it should be, apart from it being in the Western world, it should also be even in Africa, because we've got people who don't even believe that there was some slave trade, or I don't know, how did you call it? That they
mass enslavement.
Yeah, they don't believe about the mass enslavement, or they think it was not as many as it was, but it is. And people do not understand the whole politics of poverty, and we need to teach it to them, so we need to draw people in to get an idea of what's really going on. Thank you so much, Robin Walker, for coming on the show. I am enthused. I would like to have a chat with you about these children's books, and I am so grateful that you came on my show.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. I also want to thank everyone who listened, who stayed on, who joined us. I want to thank you. I want to wish you well. Bye, be well. I'm sorry, I have a hay fever and a cough, and last night I had a bit of my breathing problem, so I'm having serious problems with my breathing at the moment, but it's all good. I'm getting better. Thank you very much, everyone, one and all. You can stay on. I need to talk to you about something. But everyone else, be well. Thank you. Bye-bye.